I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Garth Greenwell has come back to the show, and I'm very excited. You may have heard his episode with Edmund White that we did for the reissue of Nocturnes for the King of Naples. But more importantly, Garth has 3 novels of his own, and the most recent, Small Rain, is now out in paperback, which I am super excited about because I happen to be a fan of paperbacks. And also now we have all of the nice reviews that came for Small Rain. But more importantly, you and I get to hang out and treat this like a brand new publication because guess what? It is new to some people.
Great. Perfect.
Hi, Garth. I'm so happy to see you.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can we talk about how Small Rain came about? Because there are some people who are assuming that it is autobiographical and more memoir than fiction, but that's not actually the case.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fiction. It's not memoir. It is true that I'm the kind of writer. Books tend to come for me from things that have happened that I've witnessed that bewilder me.
Yeah.
And it is true that I underwent a health crisis several years ago and had to spend some time in the hospital. And I did write the book as a way to try to make sense of those experiences. But the book is full of invention. It's full of stuff I've made up. It is not a memoir. It's fiction.
Bewilderment is such a beautiful word. And it's one that I think we don't use enough. And I also feel like it's one of those words that I don't know if it's because it feels old fashioned, but it's so accurate. And it's so, for me, it's not quite onomatopoeia, but for me, it's close, right?
Well, yeah, it's very pungent. It gives that sense. You've gone out into the wild and you have been bewildered. You've lost your sense of where you are. And I do think that's where a lot of the art that I love comes from.
I like the feeling of dislocation because one of the things you do in Small Rain specifically too is I'm so grounded in my sense of my body as I'm reading. And okay, we know this, novels, the interiority of humans is one of the great joys of reading a novel, right? But the way you take us through the poet, I'm just going to keep calling our narrator the poet because he is a poet. But the way you take us through the poet's experience of being a patient and not being a patient, right? That dislocation between being healthy and not being healthy. But he's sitting in this incredibly uncertain moment, right? He's anxious, he's uncertain, not really thinking about death that much, but really uncomfortable. But bewilderment adds sort of a layer of gentleness, maybe tenderness. Is that tenderness? Might be the word I'm actually looking for, where it's not just poking and prodding in machines and confuse. It's just kind of like, how did I get here? And it feels really rare to have that experience of illness on the page.
Yeah, it was something that interested me as I started working on the book to think about the fact that, illness is as close to a universal experience as we have as human beings. All of us are going to be ill. All of us are going to have periods of uncertain health. And yet, compared certainly to an experience like love, there's so little written about it, with the great exception of the literature of the AIDS crisis, which was really important to me as a young person and was really important for the book. But this feeling and this experience of bewilderment, he finds himself in a different world. The book begins with the narrator being struck down by this annihilating pain.
Right.
That pain takes him out of every environment he has ever known and puts him somewhere where he doesn't know how to orient himself. He doesn't know what anything means.
Right.
And then, when he finally does go to the hospital, after several days of waiting, because it's the height of the pre-vaccine COVID epidemic and pandemic, and he's scared of hospitals. When he finally does go in, one of the first things the surgeon, when they finally admit him and do the CT scan and figure out that he has this tear in his aorta, that it's this really serious thing, one of the first things they say to him is, you could die from this. And so this guy, who's in his early 40s,
Mm-hmm.
who's always been healthy, like he's never thought of his health. He suddenly has to confront all of these questions that he didn't expect to confront for decades about the meaning of his life and the value of his life. And that's really, the drama of the book is his attempt to make sense of those questions in relation to them.
But he's also lost his language. I mean, the language of health and the language of sickness or illness, however we want to refer to it, there's an absolute before and after moment.
Mm.
And I mean, at one point early in the book too, the poet has come to the hospital and they're like, well, were you just being stoic or were you being stupid? And he's like, I actually don't know.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know because again, it's this entirely new terrain. He doesn't have the language. He's in fact trying to translate himself. He's translating his own experience, but he doesn't have the language. And I mean, I would imagine for a poet that's impossibly disconcerting. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not great with pain. It takes me a while to notice it, right? I'm one of those people where I'm like, huh, that doesn't feel right, but I don't really know what that means.
Yeah.
And I am the last person I'm just like, should I take an aspirin? It's a New England thing. We're weird. But
Yeah.
um, watching the poet go through what he goes through and how he brings in his memories as well and his current relationship
Yeah.
is there's so much happening in this very deceptively slim novel. I love deceptively slim novels. I love it when you fit the entire world. And you do this in all three books. You
Mm.
do this in all of your novels where it's like, I'm just going to cover a lot of ground. And I realize this comes out of personal experience to a certain extent, but I do feel like thematically there's a lot about art and writing and creativity that I feel like you've been noodling since I've been reading you. I mean, and it's been a minute.
Yeah. No, I think all of that is true. It because the narrator is a poet,
Mm-hmm.
when he hears this, that he might die, and sort of he's facing the possibility that he might not get to leave the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
that puts this pressure on him to sort of say, okay, if this is it, if this is all the life I get, what has my life
Mm-hmm.
meant? And his
Right.
has been a life devoted to art, devoted to poetry. And so he finds himself asking this question, that gamble that I made with my life to devote it to this sort of single thing, has that been a good gamble? Like,
Right.
can art help us live? He has gambled that a work of art, a poem, a painting,
Mm-hmm.
that they have a value that is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
And, that if one sort of pours one's life into art,
Mm-hmm.
something is poured back from art into one's life.
Right.
And the whole book is a kind of investigation of that. And,
Right.
when I began working on the book, I knew from the start that this was going to be a book in which the protagonist basically never gets out of bed. And one of my
Right.
real anxieties when I was writing the book was, how do you can you sustain a
Mm-hmm.
novel that functions that way? But what I found was that actually, my first two books are very much books of adventure. They're books of
Right.
geographical adventure, erotic
Right.
adventure. But this is the book that feels to me most kind of far ranging. The fact that he's immobilized in his
Mm-hmm.
bed actually means the book can go anywhere. As you say, his memories, his
Mm-hmm.
experiences of art, it, to me, it gave me weirdly this like really intense constraint,
Mm-hmm.
gave me this kind of exhilarating sense of freedom in the book.
Time gets really slippery
Yeah.
too. Time gets wildly slippery. His experience of people gets slippery. Um, it's you can feel the ground shifting, even though the poet never gets out of bed.
Yeah.
Ground shifts. The ground shifts pretty significantly between childhood and adulthood and his experiences of his family and his colleagues and his students and just the world in general. And I love this mention you have of can art help us live and whatnot, because you had a conversation with Megan O'Rourke in the Yale Review. And I love this interview because I love Megan too. And she's done some really interesting work. but
thinking
one
about and writing about illness.
thinking
Yeah.
about illness, yeah, and cannot recommend her work, both the poetry collections and the memoirs. But you have a moment where you're talking about how writing isn't always quite enough. There's a poverty of the medium,
Hmm.
which is kind of an extraordinary way to describe it. Because again, like the interiority that you can capture in a novel versus what we see on a screen, or what we, whatever the size screen is, or on the stage, what have you. Um, and what you do in this book, I'm kind of like, but this is exactly what writing is for. I
Hmm.
don't I don't I don't feel a poverty of the medium, and I was hoping we could spend a little time on that
Yeah,
expression, because I
sure.
was like, really? You? What?
Well, I mean, so I absolutely agree with you. I often say I think literature is the best technology we have for the communication of consciousness,
Yeah.
and the kind of sort of the tradition in which I feel that I'm working, which
Hmm.
it's funny. I'm obsessed with Saint Augustine right now. I'm about to
Okay.
teach this 6 week class on the Confessions online. And it's for this essay I want to write precisely about this question of sort of the novel of consciousness, because
Hmm.
all of these tools for producing inwardness, I think St. Augustine invents them in the Confessions. And
Hmm.
so it's this very old tradition, I think, this attempt to write inwardness. So, yes, absolutely. I agree with you. The sort of richness of the resources that this tradition has
Hmm.
created over 1600 years.
Right.
When thinking about the sort of poverty of language, I'm thinking about the fact that I am like one of the things I'm drawn to, and one of the things that this book, which in some ways is very different from my first two books, has in common with them
Hmm.
is that I am interested in writing the body in crisis. And I'm interested what happens to consciousness when the body is in
Hmm.
crisis. And one of the big subjects of my first two books, especially the second, is the experience of sex.
Right.
And sex is something, there's a kind of conventional wisdom in writing that sex cannot be written, that
Hmm.
sex escapes language. Well, there's the same conventional wisdom about pain. So,
Right.
again, in this book, I'm trying to sort of do this thing of sort of making incommensurate things commensurate.
Hmm.
So, trying to find a way to put into language the experience of pain. But actually,
Right.
I don't think it's true that sex and pain are sort of special cases. I
Hmm.
actually think anything we try to write is trying to make this medium of language
Hmm.
adequate to something that is radically incommensurate with it. I mean, if you think about, like, I'm looking out my window at my yard
Hmm.
in Iowa City, and there's like light coming through the leaves of our big oak tree in our yard.
Yeah.
Like, what does that have to do with language? I mean, the idea that we could find some combination of words that could be adequate
Right.
to the experience of,
Right.
looking out at the light in the leaves. It's ridiculous. Like, it's absurd. It's really an absurdity. And yet there is, the act of faith is that there is something not just about language,
Hmm.
but about language put under the pressure of form.
Yeah.
These sort of specifically literary aesthetic uses of language. And what
Hmm.
does it mean to say use of language is aesthetic? It means you're making the form as charged with meaning as the content. So, the way in which something is said is as charged. And by meaning, I mean feeling, I mean,
Hmm.
significance, I mean, like that faith, that sort of, it's
Right.
that aesthetic pressure put on language that allows language somehow magically to be adequate to any experience, not just pain, not just sex, but like eating your muffin for
Right.
breakfast in the morning. That too utterly defeats language.
But also listening to you in this moment, for me, form is context, right? That the idea that we even reach for language to create a point of connection, right? I mean, you and I, any readers had that experience where you find that one sentence and you're just like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that is actually the perfect way to describe a thing. And it frequently happens with me when I'm reading you. There's a riff that the poet has later in the book where he's talking about how teaching poetry actually isn't up to the experience of it, that the words slip between poets, between poems, and it's a new way of describing context, and I'm just like, oh yeah, that's exactly. And I've never formally studied poetry. I'm the one who, found stuff early on my own in a way, but luckily it was, Cal Lowell and Anne Sexton and Philip Larkin and Sylvia Plath, all of these people that made me feel like I could connect to this art form in a way that I was not when I was being fed Keats and
Mm,
Byron, and I needed a different point of entry.
right.
And still not necessarily going to ever study it formally, but then I have Gregory Pardlow and Nicole Seeley and Natasha Trethewey and Claudia Rankine, all of these people where I'm like, oh hi, can I have more of this please? But
Yeah.
it's that context. It's creating context and points of connection. And I get excited just thinking about language, to be
Yeah.
honest. But I do love your poet because he is so obviously wrestling with decisions that he's made, and he's trying not to be crabby at people. But there is a layer of rage. I mean, you even say, or our narrator even admits that he's got these moments of rage where and it's not necessarily because he's in the hospital either, but he's like, I don't even really know where this is coming from. And so watching him process his own emotions
Yeah.
in essentially real time, right? Even though you've gotten really squirrely with time in the book and whatnot,
Right.
it's a trip. It's an
But,
absolute trip.
I mean, that was something, it was really important to me because, he spends a lot of time thinking about beauty. He spends a lot of time
Mhm.
thinking about love. You mentioned, his partner, who, because of COVID restrictions, can
Right.
only visit him like an hour a day.
Right.
And that time becomes so precious to him.
Yep.
And to have this person who sees him as a person, not as a patient, who can sort
Yep.
of restore him to his life. So he thinks about love, he thinks about beauty, he thinks about poetry, he thinks about art. But it was also really important to me that um, the book could be true to the fact that having the experience of being radically terrified,
Right.
radically vulnerable,
Mhm.
um, that does not always bring out the best in us. And
Yep.
there's one moment, because basically most of the time, you know, the nurses are great, the doctors are great.
Mhm.
He realizes he's incredibly lucky to have wound up in this really good hospital that just
Mhm.
happens to be in his town and that he's getting really good care. But there's one shift with a bad nurse, with
Oh, yes.
very young, very inexperienced, and he gets really mad.
Mhm.
And he has very uncharitable thoughts about this woman
Mhm.
who's like letting his blood pressure go up, and he has a fever and she's not taking care of it, and she's taking forever to come and see him. um, and one of the first people who read the book
Mhm.
said to me, I'm not sure about this scene. I wonder if you should tone it down. Like, the narrator is so unpleasant in this scene. And I thought, it's really important that
Yeah.
he can be unpleasant. And like, I didn't want to be protective of him,
Yep.
like let him be a jerk in that moment, which I also think is a very human response to the
Mhm.
fact that he is really scared.
Yeah.
Um, so like that, allowing him to be crabby, allowing him to sort of have these human responses, that felt super important to me.
You also talk about the asymmetry of a patient's
Mm,
experience, right? Like there's the being the patient part, and then there's everyone around you. And at one point, the poet says, well, I'm a test case. No one
right.
knows what's wrong with me. Literally, no one knows what's going on. They're going to figure out what's happening. And so it's not necessarily that he's been dehumanized. It's not, but it's just you have people who know what needs to happen, but they may not know where the answers are. Like I was never going to go to med school. I was never like I was just never. That is too much science, too much
Yeah.
like that was just never going to be my future. But the people who do choose that path,
Yeah.
right? Like they all have a very sort of particular way of seeing the world and how people sort of fit into that world. I'm sort of also thinking about like Suleika Jouad's memoir Between Two Kingdoms. And there's a lot of this kind of literature where you're like, but wait, there's still a person there. And it's not that the medical team is not seeing. It's just their focus is different. Their focus is on the problem.
Yeah.
And it happens that the problem is embodied, in a different kind of. It's not like, what am I trying to figure out what to make for lunch? It's.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and that was fascinating to me.
Mhm.
And, one of the impetuses for writing this book was
Yeah.
just that I wanted to capture, like the texture of existence in an
Yeah.
ICU, which I didn't feel that I had ever encountered
Mhm.
in it
Mhm.
before. As you say, the way that time becomes screwy
Yeah.
and, the fact that these radically asymmetrical relationships. So
Mhm.
that, for a patient, I became so and this is another thing it has in common. All of my books are really interested in asymmetrical relationships.
Yes, they are.
And like, this is a relationship in which when you're the patient, something
Mhm.
is happening to you that is utterly unprecedented, that
Right.
is going to change your life. Like the
Mhm.
stakes could not be higher, it could not be more urgent. For caregivers, you're their job.
Yeah.
And when he's lying in his ICU bed and he hears the new shift of nurses come in and they're like talking about their weekends and like their plans, and as you would at any workplace, he sort of thinks, wait a minute, like I'm dying here, like how can you be talking about? So that was interesting to me, and the fact that he has, especially for this woman named Olivia, who's his principal caregiver
Yeah.
and who's a wonderful nurse,
Mhm.
he really loves her.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a relationship unlike any relationship he's had.
Mhm.
And yet he realizes and one of actually the hardest scenes sort of for me to write was the scene when Olivia takes him from the ICU into the
In the
main ward.
in a
And he,
wheelchair. In
in
a
a wheelchair,
wheelchair. And that changes the entire equation as well.
changes everything. And he thinks, I'm probably never going to see this person again.
Right.
And like that was fascinating to me, and the way that that resonates with other aspects of his life,
Mhm.
like high school teaching. He was a high
Right.
school teacher, and in the same way, 10th grade English, when you're the student, is unprecedented and the teacher is, has a very special role. And when you're in your 7th year of teaching, there is a certain way in which it's another group of kids, like you're doing something you've done before. And
Right.
so those asymmetries are very interesting to me.
But there's an intimacy too to that asymmetry.
Well, and
And
that's, yeah.
I don't want to lose sight of that because, again, it's sort of become, I don't know if fashionable is necessarily the exact word I want, but that reminder, especially if you're anxious, to like look at your feet. Where are your feet?
Mm.
Take a deep breath. All of these things to put you back in your body.
Mm.
Right. Like we've gotten to a point where in some cases, we're living online in ways that we're not really
Become
foreseen.
disembodied. Yeah.
Right? We have become disembodied. So the idea that we can put ourselves back into a human form, right? A physical form, and notice that maybe something feels off or whatnot. But I love the idea that we get kicked into this state with a novel. Sorry, I'm enjoying it.
I mean, and that's, I love the experience of literature, of art that puts me back in my body.
Yeah.
Like that's so important to me. And it's also really important what you were saying before, that the fact that these relationships are asymmetrical
Mhm.
does not mean that they're not real.
Right.
And he realizes that, like, the fact that, of course, Olivia, when she goes home, she's not thinking about the narrator, that
Yeah.
in the same way that when he was a high school teacher, he realized that just to be able to bear it, he had to be able to sort of leave it at school and not bring it home. But that didn't mean that his care for his students was not real.
Right.
And he realizes that about the nurses too, that their care is real, and that this body that he has been, thrust into the remembrance of.
Uh-huh.
He realizes too, like, because in another thing the book is doing is kind of creating like a taxonomy of touch.
Yes.
And the way people touch him, he's constantly being touched. He's being touched in ways he's never been touched before. And the difference it makes, a doctor touching him to measure something or to examine him versus, someone like Olivia or this other nurse, Renee, who
Hmm.
touch him gratuitously, touch him to comfort him.
Right.
Like how important that is and how important bodies are
Hmm.
to the intimacies that we form with other people. Even if those intimacies are entirely unromantic, entirely, that's still the
Yeah.
body and embodiedness are so crucial to them.
And I think it's really important too, because in some ways, as a society, we've started limiting our definitions of intimacy and vulnerability, that they're only allowed to exist in certain contexts,
Yeah.
right? So of course you're going to feel vulnerable in the hospital. Of course you're looking to connect and have some sort of intimate exchange with a caretaker, right? But we've decided somewhere along the line that these tiny moments have to be contained to specific kinds of relationships. And in a way, we're again stripping ourselves out of our own bodies, right? Because I mean, yeah, there are days I wake up and I'm like, wow, that's a new weird creaky sound. What happened there? Like, I mean, it's just, you go from being an athlete to, hi, what was that?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
aging is no joke, right?
It's, I not prepared. Not, that is the nicest way I can describe. Not prepared. I've started thinking about things like, should I pick up tennis? It's a life sport. I'm like, I'm not prepared for this.
Yeah,
But,
wow.
but reading about the poet and watching how he does re-enter his body, and how his relationship with his body, and how his relationship with his own concepts of intimacy and vulnerability and anxiety, and to a certain extent truth. He's got some family stuff he's working out. that
Right.
that
Right.
I'm gonna let readers discover his family structure, because you did surprise me with a couple of relationships where I was like, oh, okay, oh, hi.
Yeah.
I
Things
mean,
get
you
complicated.
gave him a lot of different levels even if you
Yeah.
couldn't leave it.
Yeah. I mean, it was important to me that you feel this guy's whole existence, and in some ways, thinking about like tenderness, I've sometimes described the structure of the book as
Mm.
being like sort of a series of Russian nesting dolls,
Yeah.
like of different kinds of brokenness. So, like, it's
Mhm.
about this, consciousness in this body that is broken, that's living in a house because home ownership, he's a
Yeah.
new homeowner, and home ownership has been disastrous for him.
You put him through some things, Garth.
He's living, I know
That basement, why did you give him that basement? That's just
when
mean.
people say like, oh, I'm worried that the medical stuff will be triggering. I'm like, it's not the medical stuff,
Mm.
it's the home ownership stuff that's
It's that
triggering.
beam in the basement, that bad beam in the
Exactly.
basement.
So it's this broken body living in a broken house in a broken country, because
Hmm. Yeah,
this book also sort of engages with
yeah,
America in a way that my first two books didn't
right.
so intensely. And then on a planet that is broken, and all of these brokennesses
Mm.
put pressure on each other, but also what I hope becomes clear over the course of the book, and what he comes to realize maybe most specifically with his body,
Hmm.
which he has always had a very difficult relationship with,
Hmm.
that brokenness becomes, it opens up a possibility for love.
Yeah.
And, there's a moment when Olivia is bathing him because he can't even bathe himself. That's how
Hmm.
utterly dependent he is. Olivia is bathing him, and he looks down at his body, at his stomach, and he sees bruises from the heparin shot he
Hmm.
gets every 8 hours, and places where hair has been ripped away from the adhesive, and he thinks, the sort of unbidden comes to him this phrase, poor body,
Hmm.
and he realizes that this brokenness, this body that has basically always worked and that basically he's always hated, that like this moment when it has stopped working, when it is broken, opens up the possibility of a totally different relation to
Hmm.
his body. And I think that's true kind of at each level of this brokenness.
Hmm.
Um, so that was interesting to me. That was kind of a discovery for me as I was writing.
But that brokenness ultimately gives us a really hopeful novel. I think that I don't want to lose sight of that, because I mean, here we are talking about, some pretty uncomfortable stuff on multiple mental, physical, all of it, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is a great deal of hope and a great deal of affirmation in a lot of different levels, right? I mean, the poet has its moments where he's absolutely cranky and losing his mind, and then he has other moments where he's like, well, actually, I'm okay. Like, as he's contemplating death, it's not freaking him out. He's just kind of like, huh, we should probably think about this some more. And that to me is really because we've become a culture where it's like, aging, death, all of it is horrible, right? And not something you're supposed to think of when you're, under the age of 80.
Yeah. No, and that, I mean, that's another, to me, that's one of sort of the most important things happening in the book, and kind of the most important sort of journeys the narrator is on, is toward this realization that in the same way that like recognition of brokenness, recognition of negativity makes possible care, makes possible love, so too that there is a way that sort of we can only have access to our lives if we acknowledge that they're going to end. And the kind of deep paradox of this book is that, because this is a guy again in his early 40s, like a lot of people, I think, entering middle age. One, he has sort of become a little frustrated with his life, maybe just because it's his life, and like in your 20s, you can imagine all sorts of lives for yourself. And in your 40s, you're pretty much in your life, your single life. And so there's that. He's kind of frustrated or disappointed in his life. And two, he's just stopped seeing his life. I mean, there's a way, it's very hard to remain awake to your own life. And so this life, which at the very beginning of the novel, this pain sweeps this life away from him. Right. And he's put in this ICU, he's taken out of his world, put into this foreign world. And the paradox is that in taking this life away from him, this experience of illness, this experience of possible death, restores his life to him. Yeah. Because, when he's in that ICU bed, he feels the most intense longing for this life that he has taken for granted. And that's really important in the book.
Well, and watching him wrestle with being domesticated, right? He's got his partner, he's got this house with the terrible beam in the terrible basement, and the tree and all of the all of the things that he is fully unprepared for. That actually a lot of people do aspire to. Yeah. I mean, we still hold this idea, right? Home ownership, this is the thing that will make the American dream happen for you. And he's kind of like, yeah, this is why there's a tree in my yard and it's not where it's supposed to be. I mean all of these things.
He's always been a bohemian. Again, the first two novels, which are so much about geographical adventure, erotic adventure. Now he lives in the middle of the Midwest, in a little college town, in a house. He has a mortgage. He's 7 years into a relationship. Like, this is not the kind of life he imagined for himself. And again, in some ways, this is a kind of disappointment to him.
Right.
And yet, again, what I hope the sort of big arc of the novel is that he comes to realize that his life, his sort of, unremarkable domestic life, that this project of trying to know another person over years, that too is an adventure, and that it is capable of accommodating, of producing surprise and revelation. And again, that's like, it's only death. It's only having to confront, like, not as an abstraction,
right,
but as something there in the room with him. It's that allows him to grab hold of that life, to claim it for himself again.
It's a cliche for a reason, but you have to have the two sides. You've got to have the dark and the light, right, to be able to create the thing.
Right.
And I love the idea that without the brokenness and without the dislocation and without that, your guy actually just gets to see himself. Like, he never would have gotten, if it weren't for all of the other stuff, he might just still be puttering around mad at the world.
Yeah.
Right. And being able to experience that alongside the poet in this deceptively small novel, and this deceptively short novel. This is what, not even 300 pages, maybe a hair over 300 pages, but tiny 300 pages. It's delightful. I don't know. It just makes me appreciate what we can do with literature all the more, and how we can change our approaches to it. And you have written recently an essay that's running, and it's on stands now. And so actually by the time by the time this airs, it might be a little old, but it's a recent essay you've done about sort of reevaluating Giovanni's Room and your relationship to Baldwin. And this was a really profound novel for you as a young person that really affirmed the fact that, you know, here you are as a queer kid and you can work in the world. And yet, as beautiful as Giovanni's Room is, it is a product of its time. It is a product of an author who had a very specific relationship to his own queerness in a world that, you know, not everyone was walking around openly.
Mm.
And when I put that sort of against what I've read in your novels, right? Like, obviously the world has changed. Like, we live in a different, and the fact that we have a body of literature about the AIDS crisis and illness in the AIDS crisis, and what, I mean, I remember what that terrain looked like when it was still on the front pages of the papers, and what a moment that was for us as a culture and a society. And we got some great art out of it, but man, let's try not to do that again, right?
Yeah.
But you teach Baldwin. You had a student say, hey, wait a minute, you're telling me I need to care about Giovanni's Room, but I'm from Nigeria and the stakes are different.
Yeah.
And so here you are sort of reconsidering the seminal work for you. And I can see sort of how Baldwin and young Garth turn into teacher Garth, turns into novelist Garth. And I'm just wondering if you and I can spend some time with this idea of affirmation and where art, because again, your guy is, you know, can art help us live?
Yeah.
I mean, I genuinely believe art can help us live, right? I love the idea that we can even reconsider. And Baldwin is a huge part of my experiences of the world, and, you know, a huge part of my reader DNA, you know. But I love the idea that we can sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should look at the context and how we got here.
You know, I mean, so, you know, this essay, I'm really glad that you see continuities between the essay and the novel, because I do too. And you know, this essay is from my next book. And the next book
cool.
is a collection of essays that sort of try to examine this question of art and value. And they do that by looking at certain terms that feel to me kind of central to our ways of talking about art that I've become a little suspicious of. And one of those terms is this idea of affirming, you know, the idea of affirming literature, affirming representation. Because, you know, so that's sort of, there's a little slightly polemical tinge to sort of say, what exactly do we mean by this? And how can we complicate our sense of it? Because the deep question of the essay is, right, how was it possible? Like, when I was 14 in the pre-internet American South,
right,
how was it possible that Giovanni's Room, which I now think, and a big part of the essay is trying to sort of demonstrate why I think this, which I now think is absolutely built on a homophobic logic. And one of the most moving experiences you can have in American literature is reading Baldwin's novels one after the other and seeing him climb out of this homophobic logic, which was a very difficult thing for him to do. But in Giovanni's Room, I think the novel basically believes, not just the characters in the novel, but the novel itself, that the idea of durable love between men is a logical absurdity.
Right.
So how is it? And that's a book in which, you know, everybody, especially the gay people, they all end up dead or devastated. And so how is it that that book, you know, in which homosexuality is only ever a closed door,
right?
How is it that for me it opened every door? And how can thinking about that complicate our sense of what it means for art to be affirming? And that feels urgent to me as a writer, because I feel, and I know many of my friends feel, a kind of pressure toward certain kinds of representations of queer life. And certainly my first two books were often criticized for sort of having retrograde or inadequately affirming representations of gay life. And I think that that pressure hits something wrong about how art helps us live.
Right.
And so asking this question about Giovanni's Room, which I think is a great novel, a beautiful novel, which continues to provide queer people with a kind of affirmation that we need. You know, I'm hoping that by returning to that novel, we might be able to develop richer ideas of what it means for art to help us live, and how, to return to this idea of sort of form, how it is not just the representational content of art, the story, what you can paraphrase. That's not the only or even the most important element in how art helps us live.
Right.
That also these questions of the aesthetic and of form and of beauty are central to how art helps us live.
I also think, though, that we have to remember that art has context. I mean, Giovanni's Room was written in what, 57? I mean, I am one of those people who thinks, well, you know, sometimes you have to think about the era in which a particular piece of art was created, right? I love the sentences in Giovanni's Room. I prefer Another Country, though. If I'm going to do favorite Baldwins, like, I need Rufus in Times Square doing all those Rufus things, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, that first section is one of the
no, and that sort of 360 walking around, you know, but it's a very different energy on the page as well, and you can see. I love, actually, and I have done this, it wasn't really recently, but I have done the whole read everything in order kind of thing, and it's fabulous.
Yeah,
it's so fabulous. But also, I had a moment too, you know, Baldwin himself is coming back from Paris, and it was an interview with Eddie Glaude, actually, and I was like, but why did he come back? Like, he was in so many ways, he was better off in Paris, and Eddie was just like, Mama. He missed his mama. And I was like, oh, right.
Yeah.
You know, here's another piece of all of it. But, like, you know, Baldwin, as a man of his time, right? Like, he was really in the world. But 1950s, 1960s New York is certainly not 2025 New York.
No,
right? It's not even 1999 New York. I mean, if I think of New York in the 90s, I'm like, well, I kind of miss that New York. Like, dirty, weird New York, I miss.
Absolutely. But, you know, what I want, and the argument I want to make in the essay is that I don't want us to think of Giovanni's Room as something that we can do without.
Exactly.
You know, I don't want us to sort of think like, this sort of sad document of this sad time. So we don't need it anymore, which is something that people do say. You know, we have other kinds of books now. We don't need that. That the value of Giovanni's Room is not fungible. You can't just sort of replace it with another book. You know, and so that's, you know, one of the things I want to keep alive is how we can continue to have meaningful, transformational relationships with books that, are founded on false beliefs. You know, how do we deal with literature that has value and also has elements that are painful to us, like the homophobia of Giovanni's Room? You know, and how can we, in some sense, you know, I mean, how can we hold on to those books? Because there is no getting rid of them. You get rid of Giovanni's Room, you can't understand any of the queer literature that came later. So we're not going to get rid of them. So, like, how can we affirm our relationships with these books and not think of them as like disposable? You know, that in some way we are better off without them, because I don't think we're better off without them.
I'm dying to hear more about the essay collection, but I will be patient. When are you turning in the manuscript?
Turning it in, hopefully, if all goes well, by the end of the year.
Okay, so that means not 2026. All right, so we have a minute before the essay collection comes out. So I'll tell you what, we'll make a date when the essay collection comes out, because I want to talk about more of this with you. I'm delighted that Small Rain is out in paperback. And Garth, thank you so much for making the time. It was great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.